Hello everyone, and welcome to the next episode of my game development video diaries. So in this episode, I've started from the very beginning, as I mentioned in the introductory video, so that's completely starting the engine from scratch and starting from the very basics. So what I thought I would do as an introduction to this video is go over the rendering pipeline that I had in the first engine that I wrote, and then quickly highlight some of the features in the new engine pipeline that I plan to be implementing this week. So the image you can see in front of you is roughly what the original rendering pipeline looked like. There was a master renderer, and that single renderer was in charge of rendering 2D tiles that weren't batched, was in charge of rendering the UI of the game, and also rendering 3D models as well. So there was one render method, and it was very inefficient. The 2D tiling, because all of the 2D tiles were using the same vertex data, none of it was batched, so that is one major improvement that could have been done right off the bat. Now, if we move forward to this next slide, we can see an outline of what I want the new rendering pipeline to look like. So there's a batch renderer that is in charge of rendering 2D primitive objects, so that's 2D tiles that don't have a texture but just solid colors. So that could be useful for debugging mode, for, I don't know, showing collision areas with red tiles, or showing placeholder tiles with various different colors, I don't really know. As well as rendering tile objects to the screen, and a tile object is a 2D tile that has a texture, so ground detailing, that kind of thing. Inside there is a 3D modeling render that has the ability to render 3D primitives, so solid color 3D cubes, spheres, triangles, that kind of thing, and as well as textured models, which is going to be there's going to be a lot of those. As well as that, there is UI rendering capability, lighting and shadows as well. So the batch renderer is actually a sub-renderer. The 3D model renderer as well is also a sub-renderer of the main master renderer class. The master renderer's job here is actually just to prepare frames, clear buffer objects, and do a few other things in the background. The main rendering tasks are of course for the batch renderer and the 3D modeling renderer. As well as that, the various renderers have their own shader programs, shader codes, that are specific for the types of models they're rendering, so there could be a bit more efficiency and optimizations there. In the previous renderer, there was really only one shader program. Well, actually, there were two shader programs, one for 2D and 3D models, and one for the UI, so as you can imagine, it was probably not that efficient. So without further ado, I'm going to add a time lapse now to show you a bit of the programming that I've been doing. Apologies for the first little bit of it. I didn't realize that the game window when I was running it wasn't actually displaying, but that does show after a while. So ignore what I said just there about time-lapsed code and game windows not displaying. I've actually decided to cut that out because I had far too much content for it, and I couldn't get the time-lapse feature to work exactly as I wanted, so I've decided to just skip to a bit where there was a bit more to show, so going there now. So it's me from the future here. It's probably been 3 or 4 days of working on and off on the engine. I've gotten 2D rendering down, both with primitives and textures, as you've seen in the previous clips. But just a short explanation here of what I'm facing now. This textured object here is supposed to be a cube, but as you can see, it's only a 2D tile at the moment. I'm not sure why. And this primitive object here is actually a 3D object. It's supposed to be a fruit stool model, but again, it's only rendering in 2 dimensions. So there's obviously something going wrong. I think it might be either my projection matrix, or it could be something in the shader class, not the shader class, the renderer class that I might have messed up. But yeah, so not quite sure what's going on here, but I'm sure I can figure it out sooner or later. Okay, I'm back, and it's the same day, and I figured out that actually it was a really stupid reason why the models weren't showing as they should. As you can see here, they are showing perfectly fine. Here's the textured cube, and you can in fact see that now it is a cube that's being rendered. And if I close the window, the reason is I had the Z dimension scale set to 0 for both the model and the tile. So if I set those back to 0 and rerun it, we can see that in fact they are appearing as 2D shapes now. But if I redo them back, to their value beforehand and render, we can now see that they are in fact being rendered in 3D. So yeah, it was a very stupid mistake. That took me a lot longer than it should have, I'm afraid, to figure out, but we are there in the end, so now we can progress on to the next stage. Okay, so this is the same evening, and as you can see, there are a lot more textured tiles being rendered into the screen now. There are around 200,000 tiles, I believe, and we're still at the steady 60 FPS that we were beforehand, so I think some of the improvements that I've made have definitely paid off. There is an issue that I have noticed now that wasn't really that apparent beforehand, and that's this dead zone at the top of the screen and on the right hand side of the screen here. I'm not quite sure what has caused this. I went through the display manager class a minute ago and I couldn't see anything glaringly obvious, so I think I'm going to have to fine cone through some of my code just to try and figure out what it was. But I am going to stop for this week now. I know there's not that much progress that's been made, but I want to keep these videos short and sharp and to the point. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next one. Goodbye.